Hi, everyone. And here we are again in another week of social entrepreneurship. And I have been impressed with the research that you did into applied industries to find out more information. As I mentioned in the instructions, those case studies are a few years old. And even though in this case it is a company that went out of business, I think there is much to be learned, especially when we think about okay, so what happened that they weren't able to survive the recession, as some of you pointed out. I applaud you for going the extra mile. Some of you even made phone calls to find out more information, and I am impressed with your initiative on that. So good work on that, and good discussion about thinking about what happened that this particular company, which had some good things going for it, decided or had to close its doors. And I learned along with you some things about the company as well. So this week, as I promised last week, I would talk about um, the personality traits of a social entrepreneur, especially in relation to the subject that I spoke of last week, which was social capital. In order for a social enterprise to succeed, um, as the authors of the text that I'm using, I want to remind you again, social entrepreneurship. Let me see if I can get it here. Social entrepreneurship, theory and practice. And you can see the authors there. Um, I would again encourage you to pick up the text from Amazon if you're pursuing this. This week, we talked about social capital last week, and there's a chapter in this text about developing your social networks, and there's a whole section on the stages of how you get from beginning to build your social network to actually getting to social capital, because that's important to make your enterprise succeed. And this week, the chapter in the text that I'm going to be referring to is in the book that I'm using. I shouldn't say text. That's a different year. The book that you're reading. In the book that I'm referring to, the characteristics have to do with what makes a social entrepreneur successful in building social capital or in acquiring social capital. And early on, the authors of this particular book talk about the two characteristics of a social entrepreneur. One is creativity, and the other is to be an entrepreneur. Now, in this chapter, it goes into the distinction between an entrepreneur in a business kind of setting and a social entrepreneur, what sets them apart. And of course, there are some characteristics that are common to both. And I'm not sure that we can make hard and fast distinctions between the two. However, there are some characteristics that are unique, I think, to social entrepreneurs. And creativity is one of the things that the authors mention, the authors of the book I'm referring to. Um, and part of that creativity, I'm not going to go into all the details of what they say about creativity, but one of the things that jumped out to me in terms of creativity was the ability to reframe a problem. Reframing has to do with being able to see from a different perspective, putting it in a different perspective, looking at it from a problem from a different way. It's a reframing that provides a chance for new problem solving. And that's taken from page 109 of the book I'm referring to. Now, when you get into management and organizational leadership, if any of you are pursuing that, one of the things that happens in business as well is when it comes to a conflict, one of the ways that you can conflict in terms of not being able to meet certain demands or trying to figure out how to solve a particular problem in business. One of the things that the the literature talks about is learning how to reframe the problem. And that is a particular characteristic of creativity that social entrepreneurs do have. And the hackneyed phrase of being able to think outside the box, I think, that has become such a cliche that we don't know what it means. I prefer this whole concept of reframing a problem and looking at it from a different perspective that somebody else may not have thought about before. When it comes to the entrepreneur part of social entrepreneurship, the characteristics that set a typical entrepreneur apart from a social entrepreneur, I think there are a number of them. But the things that jumped out at me as I was looking at this chapter is, first of all, and I talked about this last week a little bit, about the ability to generate trust. The ability to generate trust in the people that you bring into your social network, and an optimism as well. That there is a view of the world that says no matter how impossible these problems look, or this particular problem that the person is addressing, there is an optimism that, yes, this can be addressed. Social entrepreneurs also have the ability to garner cooperation. Frequently, a business entrepreneur is one who does take some risk, but can often forge ahead as a Lone Ranger type. Whereas a social entrepreneur understands that there is no way that he or she as an individual can tackle the kind of problems that need to be addressed. And so a social entrepreneur is the kind of person who can bring about a high level of cooperation. And we saw a little bit of this last week when we talked about social capital, because you can't develop networks without some kind of cooperation. One of the other things that is important about a social entrepreneur, and this is something, if you are thinking about addressing a very difficult problems or challenging problems, or what appears to be insurmountable social problems, you need to have coping mechanisms for adversity. For those times when things don't go well, when it looks like you're not making any progress, when it looks like the whole thing could fall apart, you need to have some means of coping with adversity so that you don't fold. The other thing that I mentioned, hinted at, was the risk taking. In fact, in the literature, apparently, those social entrepreneurs who have been very successful in addressing the kinds of insurmountable problems that they do have often been people who sort of sacrificed everything they had. Their families, their friends, and in fact, their friends often thought they were crazy. Sacrificed career opportunities. I find it troubling to talk about this because I believe that, yes, we need to take risks. I'm not sure we need to sacrifice all the things that some social entrepreneurs do. Then social entrepreneurs have an empathy that is lacking often in a business type entrepreneur. They have an empathy for the people that are dealing with the kind of social problem that they want to address. They also have a drive to achieve some success, some manner of addressing that problem. So these are some of the characteristics that social entrepreneurs share. Let me see if I can summarize some of them for you. They're creative. Their creativity allows them to reframe problems in a way that sees them differently than other people do. And they have an entrepreneurial spirit, which is is necessary, but at the same time, They are social entrepreneurs are different than your normal or your regular business type of entrepreneur. They're they have ability to generate trust. They have an optimism about addressing the problem that they are thinking of. They have a propensity for cooperation because they understand that dealing with the serious types of social problems that the world faces, they need the help of other individuals. They develop good social networks in that. They also have adversity coping mechanisms that help them push through in those difficult times when it looks like the whole thing is going to fall apart, or they're not making the progress they want, or things aren't going the way they want. They are risk takers. They are willing um, to sacrifice whatever it takes to meet the problem or to come up with a solution for the problem. So these are some of the characteristics of a social entrepreneur, and I think the studies are still ongoing in terms of what sets a social entrepreneur apart. While there is some crossover in terms of being an entrepreneur, some of the same things you have to do, as we've mentioned before, a business plan, making sure you've got solid found funding. There are things that set them apart: the drive, the vision, the empathy, the trust, the cooperation, the coping mechanisms. Um, the All of these things come together to make the social entrepreneur a unique phenomenon, as we can say. So that's all I'm going to talk about in terms of those kinds of characteristics. I hope you will continue to think about them. And of course, you can do more reading about these things. And I look forward to hearing or reading your forum posts and your blog reports. And just keep doing the good work you're doing. We only have a couple more weeks left. So have a good rest of the weeks that we have left, and I hope you continue to enjoy the journey. Until next time, goodbye.